Salute to Knicks Nation, special edition, afternoon edition of Knicks Fan TV Live, presented by Manscaped. CB the Fanchise checking in with a little bit of breaking news. And whenever you get this type of news, we like to go live and hear some reactions from the people. Today's report, according to The Athletic, Shams of The Athletic, very credible. He says that the Knicks are the most aggressive suitor in a trade for Cleveland guard Collin Sexton. He said the Knicks are the most aggressive suitor for Collin Sexton. So we want to talk about that and then get your reactions to it all. Joining us today, he covers the Cavs for Locked On Cavs, covers them for about 5 years now, and he is Evan Dammerall. Evan, how you doing, man? Thanks for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, doing all right, man. You making your Knicks Fan TV debut on some breaking news. Well, let's get things started. Collin Sexton, had a great year this year, 24 points per game. How did you evaluate his third year here in the league?
I think Collins really made a case in his third year that he is an elite three level scorer, and there are some deficiencies and holes in his game, mostly in playmaking in terms of in defense as well. But there's a lot of questions whether or not this is sustainable if you dropped him into a good team because Cleveland has just been bad since LeBron has left town, and that was Collins' rookie year, the first year post LeBron again. So it's kind of hard to fully evaluate what you have with him, but he did get some all-star votes, which is definitely encouraging. He is a player that has exceeded every expectation I've had and most media members have had in Cleveland and nationally as well. And it's pretty cool that he got to spoil the Brooklyn Nets big three debut with that 42 point game and that overtime win. Then he
Yeah.
went back and beat him the following night with 21 and 10. So Colin's a good player, good kid, works hard. But like I said, there's a lot of unknowns with him, especially if you don't know what kind of player you're going to get if you put him in a winning situation.
What did you make of? Well, why do you think that they're motivated to trade him? What do you think the
A lot.
motivation is?
A lot of it has to do with the fact that he is rookie extension eligible this offseason. I know a lot of fans and some folks will say that, well, the Cavs could play the risky gamble of not paying him this offseason and waiting till the following offseason, like they're about to do with Jared Allen right now, and let Colin enter restricted free agency. And that in itself presents a dilemma where if a team pays Colin Sexton way too much money and Cleveland doesn't feel comfortable matching it, you're going to lose a valuable asset that you've spent all this time growing and developing for next to nothing. So maybe you try to sell high on his potential. Like you said, he averaged 24 points on pretty average, not average, but great efficiency, I should say, this year. So you sell high on that potential. Maybe you find a team that's interested in him. Like I've said, and Shams Charania has said, the New York Knicks are interested. I know the Miami Heat and the Indiana Pacers are as well. So there are teams interested out there for Colin, but at the same time, since he was drafted by the Cavs, he's been more or less made like the cultural leader, the face of the franchise. And if you really want to get into the semantics of it, the team has voted him almost every week for player of the week for quite a while now. And if you're his agent and you wanted to approach Cleveland in contract negotiation talks, I'd say, hey, well, he's worth the rookie max extension, which is 5 years, 168 million. And if I were Cleveland, and like I said, there's so many unknowns, you wouldn't feel comfortable committing that kind of money to him. So that's the risky gambit you have there.
Yeah.
People ask me how likely is he going to be traded. I say it's 40-60 at this point, 40 that he is, 60 that he isn't. And that's just kind of why Cleveland's maybe testing the markets and testing the waters to see what's out there for him. Because if things go sideways in these extension talks and Cleveland's ready to move on from Colin, or Collins is just ready to move on from Cleveland, rather, this is just kind of some preemptive searching. I think things are just going to start heating up more and more as we get closer to the draft.
What do you and you did hear a potential trade package or
I
what a
did.
trade package would look like? What did you hear on that?
Well, from the New York side of things, at least, it would be Obi Toppin, Kevin Knox, who I believe the team would just pick up his option then, and then it would be one of New York's first round picks this year. I believe it's 19 and 21 is what they have right now, and that's not a bad return for Cleveland. I know for fans, it's pretty disappointing. I know a lot of folks were hoping that if he was traded to New Orleans, it would be Brandon Ingram in a type of return, or if it was New York, it'd be RJ Barrett. I think people need to pump the brakes a little bit and realize that Cleveland is negotiating from a disadvantage right now. like I said, Sexton's extension eligible, so you have to find a team that's probably comfortable with paying Collin some type of extension. It could be a rookie max extension, or it could just be, so you have to commit money to this asset long term. You have to find a team who wants to do that, so that narrows the market quite a bit. And then you have a team like New York with, like Shams reported today, that they're aggressively interested in getting Collin. And I mean, there's a lot of comparisons you can draw there. There's the CAA connection with
Yeah.
Collin's
See,
agency
he
and
is a
Leon
CAA
Rose.
client. Yep, yep.
Yep. And so maybe if Cleveland is able to get Obi Toppin and they're able to get Kevin Knox and a first round pick, that's not a terrible haul for him. I know it's probably going to be disappointing for Cleveland fans, but it could be a lot worse too, because the other grim reality is you let him walk and you get absolutely nothing for him in return.
You know, from a Knicks fan standpoint, we talked about we talked about Sexton on a show just a couple nights ago. We were talking about our point guard options, and listen, there are flaws. Despite his scoring prowess, there's still question marks about his playmaking. Right, the Cavs, correct me if I'm wrong, they ran him mainly at the two last year. Right, they ran Garland primarily at the one, or how was their backcourt kind of situated?
So when they drafted Darius Garland moons ago, and John Beilein was still the head coach, time's relative in the pandemic to begin with, but that
Yeah,
feels so long ago at this
yeah.
point. They more or less tapped that they're going to kind of copy what Portland's doing or what Toronto's doing with a smaller backcourt and surrounding them with, or even Utah to an extent, and surrounding them with size at 3 through 5. For the most part, it hasn't really worked where Collin is playing the two, but he's 6'1", so he's incredibly undersized for that position. And like you said, the playmaking is limited. And there was a piece that I believe Jason Lloyd from The Athletic wrote about how teammates were frustrated with Collins' inability to move the ball in his tunnel vision, and that opposing players would taunt the Cavs and say, he's not going to pass the ball to you. And I think Collin took that to heart. And there is some evidence statistically that he moved the rock a bit more to the end of to end the season. But I think you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt as well, because when Collin played with Jared Allen as well, the recent addition they made in the James Harden trade, or being part of the James Harden trade rather, Collin had an easy read option, an easy dump down option, and a safety valve in Jarrett. And I think Collin can make the smart read and the right read, but don't expect him to be a guy who averages 6, 7, 8 assists a night. I think 4.5 to 5 will be the apex of his playmaking. And I don't really think that's his game either. He's always going to be about getting buckets. Like I said, he's an elite 3 level scorer. His biggest addition to his game this year probably is the fact that he's using his physical gifts to draw contact and get to the line on a consistent basis. So my buddy Ty Windish pointed this out to me though. For like the Knicks, Derrick Rose ended up being one of the best players for the Knicks in the
Yeah.
playoffs, and that's kind of an issue in itself if you wanted to bring Derrick back, just because Derrick Rose is an older player. He has injury history and has a lot of mileage on his body. And if you think a penetrating guard is going to dominate like that in playoff situations or in game-winning situations where the Knicks will kind of grind it out a little bit, why not get a younger, faster, and for the most part healthier option? Colin's been fairly healthy for the majority of his career so far. That seems like a pretty good move.
Yeah, I agree with you. Listen, in the playoffs, Rose is the best player on the team. There's no doubt about it. But the age and the injury, he just couldn't finish. He just couldn't finish. But he was absolutely outstanding. And I thought his role as primarily a bucket getter did us well, and also a capable facilitator. A former MVP and the like certainly helped. So in the case of Sexton, I could certainly we could certainly do with the scoring prowess. There's no doubt about it. As you said, a
Mm-hmm.
3 level score. We definitely need that, especially in the playoffs. Julius had slowed down, and we really didn't have a guy outside of Rose, who was albeit limited. We didn't really have a consistent option that can go get a bucket at will. Burks had his
Yeah.
highlight in game one, and then you didn't hear from him the rest of the series, and that's who Alec Burks is. He's a very erratic player. So from a scoring standpoint, I think he could certainly help. The playmaking is just a bit of a question mark, because I think that the Knicks could use a bit more balance in their lineup in terms of getting guys easier buckets, whether that's Julius Randle, whether that's R.J. Barrett, whether that's Mitchell Robinson. We have the lob threat to Mitchell Robinson, the vertical threat. Obi Toppin is another guy that needs a good playmaker to help him get better. So that's a bit of a concern, from a Sexton standpoint. But obviously, the scoring prowess is something that I think you would have to potentially take a risk on. The Knicks are in a
Mm-hmm.
position now where, being the fourth seed, now the pressure's on, the expectations are there to continue that or exceed that, and they're in a position where for the next few years, they're likely going to be drafting from the mid to low first round. Free agent crop this year doesn't look that great. Free agency is always a crapshoot. So even though Sexton has his flaws, I think a trade in this realm or around that framework is something that Knicks are gonna have to roll the dice on some of these things and take a chance on a
Hmm.
player, young player with some upside. The kid has gotten better year after year. He may not be my ideal point guard, but it's certainly the type of move that I think the Knicks should be looking to make in the event the Dame trade or someone of that caliber is a bit too rich for them at this stage in the game. A guy like a Sexton could be a ladder, to a Dame trade or another superstar down the road.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it too, especially if you can get him on a more team-friendly deal as well. Because I've gauged maybe 26 teams at this point when it comes to extending Sexton. The Cavs not included in this, so 26 of the 29 teams. And the lowest I heard was 18 million a year over 4 years, and this is just a flat estimate. They could be
Hmm.
descending or ascending from contracts. Money's weird, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to count people's dollars and how much they make per year too often, or as high as 22.5. If you can get a player like that for that price range, that's not terrible. And I think it's a pretty easily movable contract if things don't work out. But Colin Sexton's the kind of player who plays with a chip on his shoulder too. So if he were traded to New York, I think hell hath no fury like a Sexton scorned, especially when he plays Cleveland. I think it'd be like Andrew Wiggins playing Cleveland every single time kind of
Yeah.
situation. And Colin, from what I've gathered, his camp wants to go to New York. Their
Mm.
preference is to go to New York, or their preference is either there or Miami because Colin is a huge Jimmy Butler fan
Mm.
and wants to play alongside Jimmy Butler if you had the option too. And you have a good point. Colin isn't one who can move the rock. And I'm looking at your chat. A lot of folks are saying Lonzo Ball could be an option for the Knicks. Like, I don't hate that fit either because Lonzo has shown he's a good shooter. But as a backup plan, if you're able to get Colin Sexton and you're able to re-sign Julius Randle and you keep RJ Barrett and you kind of keep assembling these nice collection of pieces,
Yeah.
the Knicks can kind of bludgeon teams to death too. Because with Thibodeau coaching that defense, they're going to play at an elite level every single night. And
Just give me a ping. Let me just make sure that we are back up and live and direct. Had a little bit of technical difficulties, so appreciate everybody for your patience. Once again, just to restart, just to recalibrate, CP here. Special guest Evan Dammerall from Locked On Knicks. We Locked On Cavs. We were talking about the athletic report that the Knicks are the most aggressive suitor for the Cavs guard Collin Sexton. So we were just kicking it on the whole Sexton trade dynamics, the pros, the cons, and we're gonna take your calls in just a few minutes. Evan, just to reiterate, you were saying that Sexton has interest in New York, but also Miami, right?
yeah, that's correct. Colin really looks up to Jimmy Butler to jump back to the Miami thing before we talk about New York. And I think he just really wants to play alongside him. I mean, honestly, if you were 22 years old and about to become a multimillionaire, wouldn't you want to live in New York or Miami? I mean, I would. I know I would. But I think he wants to play with Miami because he's a big fan of Jimmy's play style. I think him and Jimmy would feed off of each other, and it would just be
All right, guys. Here's the deal. Having some technical difficulties with the machine right now, so we're just gonna cancel today's show. We'll postpone it. We'll reschedule it with Evan for some time this week. Take your calls later on as well. Just too much system issues right now, so I don't want to keep starting and stopping, starting and stopping. Apologies on the delay. It happens. And we'll get it fixed. I had a draft show scheduled for tonight. I think I'm gonna cancel that as well and move that to next week. We have another one Thursday with Jonathan Wasserman of Bleacher Report. So hopefully we'll get the system issues corrected by then. Just stick with us, man. Have some patience. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. We had almost 1,000 people going on. So let me just reschedule this conversation with Evan. We'll table it for a couple of days. Just get the system issues fixed, man. It's just too much going on right now. A spike in activity, and it's throwing everything off. So I just want to make sure that we can get a proper show in. And yeah, man, just tune in either later on this week or stay tuned for the announcement. All right, thanks.